All right, guys. So today we're talking about the aftermath of the French and Indian War, or the aftermath of the 7 Years' War, depending on what you want to call it. Historians will refer to it by both names. The war is over, though, and we won. This is a great thing. So what we're going to see is that when Great Britain wins this war, France is really forced to turn over, to forfeit all of its land. Traditionally, that's what happens, right? When you lose a war, there's a price to be paid. And usually that price is paid in terms of land. And so they had to turn over and forfeit all of their North American land holdings to the British. This is enormous for the British. So this is what the map now looks like, right? All of the area there that is pink used to be French lands, but after the war of the French-Indian War, the French had to turn that over. So the British now control not only that sliver of land along the coast, but all the land up to and including the Mississippi River. The other side of the Mississippi belongs to the Spanish. That had been French as well, but because the Spanish had been their allies, they gave that land to the Spanish. They weren't, according to the treaty, they were not allowed to own any territory in the New World, but I think it would be a cold day in hell before they gave all the land to the British. They gave up to the British only what they absolutely had to. So that's what the New World now looks like. Now, the interesting thing is this. At that time, we won. We were British. We won the war. We contributed to it. We were proud. Long live the king, right? This was a good thing. Nothing boosts patriotism like winning a war. And we certainly were there. The problem is that it's not going to last very long, because what we realize is we have a difference of opinion. Have you ever had a major disagreement with a friend, and you see things one way, but they see things, the same event, the same argument, the same discussion, they see it from a completely different perspective? Now, clearly they're wrong, right? Of course, they would say the same thing about you, right? Our perception of any event is what shapes our truth. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a truth. There is a way that things happen. But one of the other mantras of this class is that perception trumps reality. Perception trumps reality. So there's two different realities here. There's the reality according to our perception, and there's the reality according to their perception. So we're going to take a look at our point of view first, okay? From our point of view, we had sacrificed a tremendous amount to win this war. We fought incredibly bravely, right? We were not the well-trained soldiers of the British Army. We were farmers, and we were merchants, and we were people that were living in this wild frontier. And so the fact that we had been involved in this war, much of which took place on North American soil, we felt like we had sacrificed an enormous amount. We gave of our money. We gave, well, little we had, right? We gave of our resources. We gave of our sons and our brothers. So there was a lot that we really gave up in order to help our mother country, right, England, to win this war. Now, because of that, we felt like it's time. This is our time, right? We've shown what we're able to do, so we will finally, after all this time, be treated as equals. We're making money for the British Empire. We're helping to defend the British Empire. And so finally now, they won't look at us as second-class citizens, as kind of the backwater of the empire. They'll view us as equals, as important. Not greater than the empire, not greater than England, but it's certainly at least equal to. That was our desire. That was our perception, that because of what we sacrificed, we would finally be viewed as equals, that we had worth. Now, the other thing is that because we had fought and won this war, and we had gained all this new territory, that the newly won lands would be opened up in the West. So we had been barred really from going west of the Appalachian Mountains because that wasn't our territory. That belonged to the French. But now that it was our territory, we know there's good, fertile ground there. We know there's new timber there. We know there's all sorts of resources and opportunity. And so it's finally going to be opened for us. Now, that's our view. Let's take a look at their point of view, because they're really dramatically different, right? And it's going to be the source of a lot of the conflict moving forward. So they believed that we had really been cowards on the battlefield. And that's unfortunate, but where we believe we were brave, they believe we were cowardly. The reason for that is because think about how the British fought. They stood shoulder to shoulder. They marched on an open battlefield. They had overwhelming power of numbers, overwhelming power of technology and weaponry on their side. They had training, they had experience. These troops had been in battle before, they had faced these situations before, they knew what to do. And they expected us to behave like them. They expected us to follow the accepted rules of war and to fight the way they fought. That was considered gentlemanly. That was considered brave. That was considered following the accepted rules of war. But we didn't fight that way. We fought more of a guerrilla style warfare. We ambushed people. We hid in the woods. We used sharpshooters to take out their officers, right? That sort of technique and tactic. It's how we could contribute. It's how we could help win, but it was viewed as kind of dirty pool, so to speak, right? It was not the way war was supposed to be fought. And so because of that, where we feel we were brave and sacrificial, they felt like, oh, we were cowards. We were less than gentlemen. We were less than men. And so there's a big difference in how we see our service and how they see our service. Next, they believe that the colonial assemblies had been really tight-fisted when it comes to money and resources, and that we had not sacrificed enough during the war. Again, it's a difference in the way we see things because it's a difference in our style of living. So many of the American colonists are subsistence farmers, meaning that they grow everything that they need to eat. They have very little leftover surplus. They have very little cash. And so how can you expect those people to contribute the same way the people of London, Liverpool, and so forth, those that are wealthier? Yes, the money, because the manufacturing, because the corporations all reside in England, thanks to those mercantilist policies. Watch the video on mercantilism if you don't know about that. But because of those mercantilist policies, the wealth is really in England. And so they could afford to donate more. They could afford to be taxed more. They could afford to provide more resources. We were providing what we could, and what little we provided, in many cases, represented a greater sacrifice. And so they thought that we should, the colonial assemblies should raise taxes, should force people to donate goods and resources, and those sorts of things. But it simply wasn't possible. We gave until it hurt. In many, many cases, we gave out of our, not just our surplus, but it meant we had to tighten our belts in order to support this war, which we did. It's just that that sacrifice wasn't recognized by the people of London, by the people of Great Britain. So next, they believed that the colonies were and always would be subservient to the empire. They had no intentions of ever viewing us as equals. They had no intentions of ever allowing us to grow beyond what they saw as our station in life. That was to serve them, to serve the empire, to provide the resources. We were a dirty, uneducated, backwater group of colonies that served an economic purpose, but that was it. They were never going to see us as anything above that, certainly not as equals. So now we have to take a look a little bit at the British side of things, and we often look at our end of things, but the British have a real crisis. There's a problem for them. Now we know how we saw things, and we know how they saw things, and understand that they are dramatically different. Dramatically different. And it's going to cause this rift between the American colonists and the British motherland, right? And so the British the British crisis really is that the war was incredibly costly. It was very costly. It was expensive to fight against France. It was expensive to fight a war across the ocean. But what that means is that now that they've won, they need to recuperate some of those costs. Right? They need to recoup the cost. They need to make the colonies more profitable. We've always been profitable. We've always provided resources. We've always been a built-in market for manufactured goods. Again, see mercantilism. But the reality is they had kind of been hands-off. That idea of salutary neglect they had kind of been hands off and not worried too much about it. But now that a war had been fought and money needed to be paid back and the treasury needed to be restocked, they needed to make sure we were as efficient and profitable as possible. And so what that means is that the British troops really stayed in the colonies. Now, they said that they were there, that they were staying there to protect us against the Spanish, right? Now the Spanish are our new neighbors, and they wanted to make sure that the Spanish didn't get any ideas of trying to take our land. Well, that doesn't really ring true to the colonists because the Spanish have never been aggressive towards us. They've never shown any interest in really trying to take over any of our lands, so that kind of rings hollow. They said, well, it's also to protect against the return of the French. We just fought a war. We need to make sure they don't try to come back. Well, understand that we would have noticed, right? We would have noticed if the French had come back. They had no permanent settlements. They had no large populations. So for them to make a real run at trying to take back the American territories there, they would have had to send a large fleet, a lot of people, and the reality is that would have been noticed. So they weren't really a threat to us. The war was expensive for them as well. They were reeling from political turmoil at home, and so there were a lot of conflicts. This was no longer in the cards for them. And then they said, well, it's also to help protect you from the Native Americans. They could be hostile. And to a lot of the colonists, we said, yeah, they can be hostile. There can be conflict. And there's been conflict for 150 years. Where were you when we were settling this area? Where were you then? You didn't send troops to help with the Native Americans at that point. You didn't seem all that interested in helping us to settle our affairs then. So why now? All three of their reasons ring very hollow, ring untrue to us. And that's because they were. They're going to end salutary neglect, and Parliament is going to focus on controlling the colonies, creating laws to make us more profitable, more efficient, to make more money. And in order to ensure that those laws are obeyed, they now need troops in the colonies. So typically when you win a war, the troops go back home, right? Come back home or whatever, but they usually leave. There may be a small presence, but this was different. The presence wasn't diminishing. It was actually growing a bit from wartime efforts. And so that really caused concern because none of the reasons that they told us seemed to be true. Instead, it looks like they're going to be here as agents of the king. So it creates this rift, again, between the kingdom and the colonies. And that rift will never be healed. Not until we become allies long after we've won our independence. And so now they're going to begin to do away with salutary neglect. They're going to increase their troop presence. They're going to always view us as subservient. And those are the things that really lead to the major rift, the major separation, and this movement for independence. There are other things as well, and we're going to look at some of the specifics in upcoming videos. But ultimately, that's what we're looking at. So if you haven't watched the video on mercantilism, if you haven't watched the video on salutary neglect, go ahead and watch those. They're going to be very important to understanding kind of this concept as we move forward. And feel free to subscribe, watch any of the other videos that we've got posted. Guys, I appreciate your time. I hope you have a better understanding of the feelings between the colonist and the kingdom after the 7 Years' War or the French Indian War. Thanks for watching, guys.